My name is Sarah Whitman, and what I am about to share with you will sound unbelievable, but I promise, every word is true. On a cold December night in 2023, my life changed forever. I didn't just face death, I crossed the threshold into the unknown. What I experienced during those moments is something I cannot keep to myself. It's a message too important to withhold, a truth that might alter the way you see this life and the one to come. That night, I was driving home from a late meeting. The streets were slick with rain and the glow of holiday lights reflected on the wet pavement. I remember feeling tired, my mind wandering between thoughts of work deadlines and plans for Christmas with my family. I had no idea that within moments, everything I knew about reality was about to be shattered. As I approached the intersection of Willow and Pine, the light turned green. I accelerated, glancing briefly at the clock on my dashboard. It was 8:13 p.m. That's when it happened. Out of nowhere, a truck barreled through the intersection, running a red light at full speed. There was no time to react. The collision was deafening. Metal crunched against metal, glass shattered, and then silence. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my car, at least not in the way you'd think. I was floating above the wreckage, looking down at the crumpled remains of my vehicle. My body was still there, slumped against the steering wheel, blood pooling around me. Paramedics were rushing to the scene, their voices urgent, their movements frantic, but I felt no pain. Instead, I felt an overwhelming calm, as if all the worries and fears I had ever carried had been lifted away. I realized something profound. I was no longer tethered to my body. For the first time, I felt truly free. I looked at the scene below me with a strange detachment. My mind wasn't focused on the tragedy unfolding, but on a pull, a gentle yet insistent force urging me to look away, to follow a light that was growing brighter in the distance. The light was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It wasn't just bright, it was alive, pulsating with energy and warmth. It filled me with a sense of peace so profound I could hardly contain it. As I moved toward the light, I began to hear music. It was ethereal, a symphony of voices singing in perfect harmony. The language was unlike anything I'd ever known, yet I understood every note and every word. It was a song of love, of creation, of eternity. That's when I saw him. Standing at the center of the light was a figure more radiant and beautiful than I could have ever imagined. It was Jesus. Not the way he is often depicted in paintings or statues, but as a presence so real and so powerful that every fiber of my being recognized him instantly. His eyes, oh, his eyes, they held the universe within them. They looked at me with a love so complete, so unconditional, that I fell to my knees without even realizing it. "Sarah," he said, his voice resonating not just in my ears but in my very soul. "Do not be afraid." I don't understand," I stammered, my words barely audible. "Am I dead?" "In a way," he replied, a gentle smile spreading across his face. "But your journey is not yet over. There is something you must see, something you must understand before you return." Return. The thought hadn't even crossed my mind. At that moment, I didn't want to go back. The world I had left behind seemed so distant, so small compared to the infinite beauty and peace of this place. "Why me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Because you have a purpose, Sarah," he said. "There is a truth the world must know, and I have chosen you to carry it." Before I could ask what he meant, the light around us began to shift. Suddenly, I was no longer in the warm glow of heaven, but in a vast expanse of darkness. It wasn't an ordinary darkness. It was alive, oppressive, and filled with a sense of dread that made my chest tighten. In the distance, I saw a flicker of fire, and as I drew closer, the full horror of what I was witnessing became clear. I was standing at the edge of a pit, a chasm so deep and so wide that it seemed to have no end. Within it, I could see countless souls, their faces twisted in agony. They were reaching upward, their cries echoing through the darkness. The flames around them were not like earthly fire. They didn't consume. They tormented, burning without ever providing relief. This is the fate of those who choose to turn away from the truth," Jesus said, his voice heavy with sorrow, "but it is not the only truth you must see." Before I could process what I was witnessing, the scene shifted again. I was now standing in a place that looked like Earth, but wasn't. It was eerily silent, the skies gray and lifeless. People moved about in robotic fashion, their faces blank and devoid of emotion. On their foreheads and hands, I saw a strange mark, a symbol that pulsed faintly with an unnatural light. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice shaking. "This is a vision of what is to come," Jesus replied. "The mark you see is the mark of the beast. It is a symbol of allegiance, not just to an earthly power, but to a force that seeks to claim dominion over all creation." As he spoke, I felt a chill run through me. The people with the mark seemed trapped, their movements mechanical, their eyes hollow. They were alive, but they weren't truly living. It was a terrifying sight, and I couldn't help but wonder how such a thing could happen. "This is why you must return, Sarah," Jesus said, placing his hand on my shoulder. "You must warn them. Tell them what you have seen. Tell them that the choices they make today will shape their eternity." I wanted to protest, to beg to stay in his presence, but I knew he was right. There was a mission I had to fulfill, a truth I had to share. As the light around me began to fade, I felt myself being pulled back toward the broken body I had left behind. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was his face, filled with love and sorrow. I woke with a gasp, my lungs struggling to fill with air. Pain flooded back into my body, sharp and relentless. The sounds of the accident, the sirens, the panicked voices of the paramedics rushed in like a tidal wave. For a moment I was disoriented, unsure if what I had experienced was real or a hallucination brought on by trauma. But then I remembered his face, his words, the weight of the truth he had revealed to me. The hospital became my new reality for the next several weeks. My injuries were severe. A broken leg, fractured ribs, and a concussion, but none of that compared to the emotional and spiritual transformation I was undergoing. I couldn't stop thinking about the vision of the pit and the people bearing the mark. Their faces haunted me, as did the hollow emptiness in their eyes. I spent hours in prayer, asking God to guide me, to help me make sense of what I had seen. Slowly, clarity began to emerge. The mark wasn't just a physical symbol, it was a representation of something much deeper. It signified a choice, a deliberate turning away from the truth and an embrace of a deceptive promise. Jesus had shown me how easily people could be led astray. In my vision, the mark was given not through force, but through persuasion. The people believed they were gaining freedom, security, and prosperity, but in reality they were surrendering their souls. The enemy didn't conquer through fear alone. He used subtlety and allure, twisting what seemed good into something profoundly evil. As I recovered, I began to notice signs in the world around me that matched the warnings in my vision. Technology was advancing at an unprecedented pace, and with it came promises of convenience and connection. But I could see the undercurrent of control. Digital identities, cashless systems, and surveillance tools were becoming normalized, hailed as progress. The whispers of the mark were growing louder, hidden beneath layers of innovation and efficiency. One night, as I sat by the window in my hospital room, the weight of my mission pressed down on me. I couldn't keep this to myself. Jesus hadn't just shown me the future. He had tasked me with warning others, with helping them see the truth before it was too late. I began writing everything down. Every detail, every sensation, every word Jesus had spoken to me. I poured my soul into those pages, knowing that this message wasn't mine to keep. It belonged to the world. Days turned into weeks, and I finally returned home. My physical wounds were healing, but my heart remained heavy. I felt a constant urgency, a sense that time was running out. I started sharing my experience with those closest to me, friends, family, members of my church. Most listened politely but skeptically. Some dismissed it outright, attributing it to the trauma of the accident, but a few believed. They saw the conviction in my eyes, heard the passion in my voice, and understood the gravity of what I was saying. It was with their encouragement that I decided to speak publicly. If the message was too big for one person to carry, it needed to reach as many people as possible. The first time I stood in front of a crowd, I was terrified. My hands trembled as I held the microphone, my heart pounding in my chest. But then I remembered his face, the love and sorrow in his eyes, and I knew I couldn't let fear silence me. I began by telling them about the accident, the moment my life had been torn apart. I described floating above my body, the light that called to me, and the overwhelming peace I had felt. And then I told them about him, how Jesus had appeared to me, more real and more powerful than anything I had ever known. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word as I recounted the visions. I described the pit of despair, the souls trapped in eternal torment, and the mark of the beast. I warned them about the deception, about how the enemy would use subtlety and allure to lead people astray. I pleaded with them to stay vigilant, to anchor themselves in the truth, and to resist the temptations of a false freedom. As the weeks went on, I began to notice a pattern. People were hungry for answers, desperate to make sense of the chaos in the world. They wanted hope, but they also wanted direction. They wanted to know how to discern truth from lies, how to protect themselves and their families from the creeping darkness. That's when I realized that my mission wasn't just to warn, it was to equip. Jesus hadn't sent me back just to describe the visions. He had sent me back to prepare his people for the battle ahead. I started studying scripture with a renewed fervor, finding connections between my experience and the prophecies of the Bible. Passages I had read countless times before now came alive with new meaning. The warnings about false prophets, the descriptions of the end times, the call to remain steadfast in faith, all of it pointed to the reality I had witnessed. I began teaching others how to recognize the signs, how to deepen their relationship with God, and how to stand firm against the pressures of the world. The mark of the beast wasn't just a future threat. It was a present danger, slowly creeping into every facet of society. One night, as I prayed for guidance, I felt a familiar presence. It wasn't a vision like before, but a quiet whisper in my heart. "Do not grow weary, Sarah," the voice said. "You are not alone in this fight. I am with you always." Tears streamed down my face as I realized the magnitude of his love. Jesus hadn't just given me a mission. He had given me his strength, his wisdom, and his presence. I wasn't carrying this burden alone. From that moment on, I resolved to press forward no matter the cost. The message was too important, the stakes too high. The battle for souls was real, and I had been called to the front lines. The months that followed were a whirlwind. The message I had been given began to spread far beyond what I could have imagined. It started with small gatherings at my church, but soon invitations came pouring in from all over. Community centers, conference halls, even online platforms. I found myself speaking to people from every walk of life, all desperate for answers, for hope. But with every step forward, the resistance grew stronger. At first, it was subtle. Skeptics mocking me in the comments sections of videos or calling me delusional. But as the message gained traction, the opposition became more organized. People accused me of fear-mongering, of spreading dangerous ideas. Even some religious leaders distanced themselves, unwilling to entertain what they saw as an extreme interpretation of Scripture. I tried not to let it deter me, but the attacks wore on me. I questioned whether I was strong enough to carry this burden, whether I was truly the right person for this mission. During one particularly dark night, I fell to my knees, sobbing, and cried out to God. "Why me, Lord? Why did you choose me for this? I'm not strong enough. I'm not wise enough. I'm just me." The answer came, not in a booming voice or a vision, but in a quiet, steady reassurance that filled my heart. "My strength is made perfect in weakness." I clung to those words. They became my anchor as the storm around me grew. It wasn't long before the visions began again. This time, they didn't come during sleep or in moments of prayer, but as vivid flashes that interrupted my waking hours. Each one was more intense than the last, filled with imagery that both terrified and inspired me. In one vision, I saw a great tower rising in the center of a vast city. It gleamed with technology, its surface covered in screens displaying messages of peace and prosperity. People flocked to it, their faces filled with awe. But as I looked closer, I saw the foundation of the tower was crumbling, cracks spreading beneath its shiny exterior. And above it, a shadow loomed, a figure cloaked in darkness, watching with satisfaction as the people fell deeper under its influence. In another, I saw a small group of people standing together in a circle, holding hands and praying. They were surrounded by chaos, fires burning, storms raging, and crowds shouting in anger. But within their circle, there was peace, a light that pushed back the darkness. I understood then that the faithful would face persecution, but they would not stand alone. The most striking vision, however, was of a scroll being opened in the heavens. Each time a seal was broken, events unfolded on earth: plagues, wars, natural disasters. But with the breaking of the final seal came a moment of profound silence, followed by a light so brilliant that it drove the shadows away. It was a reminder that despite the trials to come, the ultimate victory belonged to God. These visions reignited my urgency, but they also brought a new clarity. The mark of the beast wasn't just a distant threat, it was a progression, a series of steps leading humanity away from truth and toward destruction. And it wasn't just about a physical mark, it was about allegiance, about choosing whom we serve. I began incorporating these revelations into my teachings. I urged people to pay attention to the small compromises, the ways in which the world was conditioning us to accept what seemed harmless but carried a deeper cost. It was in the erosion of moral boundaries, in the normalization of control disguised as convenience, in the silencing of voices that spoke against the status quo. The battle isn't just coming, I told them. It's already here, and the choices we make today will determine where we stand when the time comes. As the message spread, I started noticing something incredible. People weren't just listening, they were acting. Prayer groups formed, communities came together, and individuals began taking steps to deepen their faith. They started questioning the narratives being fed to them, seeking out the truth for themselves. It wasn't easy. Many faced ridicule, even from their own families. Others lost jobs or relationships because of their convictions. But the light I had seen in that small group during my vision, the light of unity and faith, was beginning to shine in the real world. I also began connecting with others who had experienced similar revelations. Some had faced near-death experiences like mine. Others had been moved by dreams or spiritual encounters. Together we formed a network supporting one another and amplifying the message. It was a reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight, that God was raising up warriors across the globe, each playing their part in the greater plan. But the enemy wasn't idle. With every step forward, new challenges arose. A smear campaign began circulating online, accusing me of being a fraud. Videos and articles twisted my words, painting me as a fearmonger or a fanatic. Some even claimed I was working for the very forces I was warning against. It hurt deeply. But every time I felt the weight of the attacks, I remembered Jesus' words. "You will be hated by everyone because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved." I realized that the resistance was proof that the message was reaching its target. The enemy wouldn't fight so hard if the truth weren't threatening his plans. One night, after a particularly difficult day, I had another vision. I saw Jesus standing on a hill, his arms outstretched. Below him, a great army was gathering, not one of soldiers, but of ordinary people, their faces filled with determination and faith. They carried no weapons, only the light of truth, which shone so brightly that the shadows recoiled. "You are not alone," he said, his voice like a melody that filled the air. "The victory is already won. Stay faithful, and the light will overcome the darkness." When I awoke, I felt a peace I hadn't known in weeks. The storm was still raging, but I knew now that I wasn't fighting for victory. I was fighting from victory. The outcome had already been decided. As I continued the mission, I felt a shift. It wasn't just about warning people anymore. It was about equipping them, strengthening their faith, and building a community that could stand firm in the face of whatever was to come. The mark of the beast was a real and present danger, but so was the light of Christ. And no matter how dark the night became, I knew the dawn was coming. The turning point came when the resistance reached its peak. I had been invited to speak at a large gathering, a multi-day conference organized by believers who had embraced the message. Thousands were expected to attend, and countless more would watch online. It was an opportunity to reach people in a way I never had before, but it also drew unprecedented scrutiny. The day before the event, I received a message from an anonymous source. It warned me not to speak, claiming that there were forces who wouldn't allow it. I should have been afraid, but instead I felt a deep resolve. This was exactly what Jesus had prepared me for. The truth had to be spoken, no matter the cost. The first night of the conference was electric. The room buzzed with anticipation as I stepped onto the stage. For a moment, I stood in silence, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. Then I began to speak, not from a script, but from my heart. I was an ordinary person, living an ordinary life, I told them. But then, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. I saw the truth of what lies beyond this life, the consequences of our choices, and the reality of the battle we are all a part of. As I recounted my experience, the room fell silent. The weight of the visions, the warnings about the mark of the beast, and the urgency of Jesus' message settled over the crowd. I saw tears in the eyes of some, resolve in the faces of others. It wasn't just my story, it was their story too. They understood the stakes, and they were ready to act. That night, as I prayed in my hotel room, I felt a presence I hadn't sensed since my near-death experience. The air grew still, and a warmth enveloped me. Then I heard his voice again, as clear as the first time. "Sarah, you have been faithful. Now the harvest begins." I didn't know exactly what he meant, but I felt a peace that words can't describe. The seeds of truth had been planted, and now it was time to trust God to bring them to fruition. Over the next months, the movement grew. People from all over the world reached out, sharing their own experiences, asking questions and seeking guidance. It wasn't about me, it was about the truth Jesus had revealed. The message had taken on a life of its own, spreading in ways I couldn't have imagined. Small groups formed in cities and towns, dedicated to studying scripture, praying and supporting one another. They weren't just preparing for the future, they were living out their faith in the present. Acts of kindness, courage, and selflessness became their way of resisting the creeping darkness. I watched as ordinary people became extraordinary. A single mother in Ohio started a community pantry, trusting that God would provide for those in need. A retired teacher in Australia began leading Bible studies for young people, teaching them how to discern truth from lies. A businessman in Kenya used his resources to build wells in remote villages, bringing both water and the message of hope. The light was spreading. But the enemy wasn't finished. As the movement grew, so did the efforts to silence it. Government officials began issuing warnings about dangerous misinformation. Social media platforms flagged and removed content related to the message, labeling it as harmful. In some places, gatherings were disrupted by authorities, and people were fined or arrested. It was a stark reminder that the battle was far from over. Yet, the harder the enemy pushed, the stronger the resolve of those who had embraced the truth. One night, as I spoke to a group in a small church, I noticed a young girl in the front row. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old, but her eyes were filled with a wisdom far beyond her years. After the meeting, she approached me and handed me a folded piece of paper. "Jesus told me to give this to you," she said. I unfolded the paper to find a simple drawing, a great tree with deep roots, its branches stretching toward the heavens. Around the tree, light pushed back the darkness. Below it, in a child's handwriting, were the words, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." John 1:5. Tears filled my eyes as I realized the truth of those words. No matter how fierce the battle became, the light would not be extinguished. As the years passed, I continued to share the message, but it was no longer just mine to carry. The movement had grown into something far greater than I ever imagined. It wasn't about one person or one story. It was about a collective awakening, a global community standing together in faith. The mark of the beast was still a looming threat, but so was the promise of God's ultimate victory. People were waking up to the choices before them, realizing that every decision, every action was part of the greater battle. I often thought back to that first moment when Jesus had told me to return and share the truth. At the time, it had felt like an impossible task, but now I saw the beauty of his plan. It wasn't about me, it was about him and about what he was doing through his people. One evening, as I watched the sun set over the hills near my home, I felt a sense of completion. The fight wasn't over, but the mission Jesus had given me was no longer mine alone. It was in the hands of the millions who had embraced the light, who were carrying it into every corner of the world. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer of gratitude. Thank you, Lord, for choosing me, for trusting me, for walking with me every step of the way. The battle belongs to you, and the victory is yours. In the distance, the first stars began to appear, tiny points of light piercing the darkness, and I knew, without a doubt, that the light would continue to shine, pushing back the shadows until the day his glory covered the earth. Thank you for joining me on this journey as I shared my story here on Past Stories. If my experience resonated with you or made you reflect, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that touch the soul and challenge the mind. Let's keep this conversation going in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts or your own experiences. Together, we can explore the truths that shape our lives. Until next time, take care and stay blessed.